Daniel Ebert, the most financially literate individual that I've ever met. Welcome back into Fair Forward, man.
Thanks for having me. Pumped to be here, round 2. We made it happen.
We made it happen, dude. Well, I think today's going to be a really cool episode, and I'm going to learn a lot as well, because what we're going to focus on is relevant for a lot of listeners of my show, and it's going to be how to financially optimize your life in your 20s. Let's talk about this, just to kind of frame what we're about to discuss. How important is it to save when you're young?
Saving when you're young is the most important time to save, and I brought some statistics I've memorized along with me to share.
Hit me.
So every 30 years, $1 turns into 10 if invested properly. So assuming a very moderate 8% rate of return, $1 saved at age 20 becomes $10 at age 50. Ultimately, if you fast forward to age 30 and you have $100,000 saved, that means you will have $1 million saved at 60 without ever saving an additional cent. Again, like we talked about on the first episode, keys to success, getting rich slowly.
I mean, that's the reality. Everybody wants to get rich fast. You work with a lot of people that are wealthy. The funny thing is they probably got rich slowly over time.
More often than not.
Right? And everybody wants to sell you the dream that if you do this or this or this, like you're going to make all this money. And the truth is those usually don't work. And the things we're going to discuss today sound like the proven approach to actually building wealth.
The goal is for this to be something not only effective, but more so sustainable, because it's a lot like the recycling bin logo. Everything that's effective and understandable is usually more sustainable.
There are two buckets we'll talk about. There's the saving side and there's the investing side. On terms of the saving side, part of it is earning a good income. We'll talk about how to do that. But another part of it is reducing your expenses. Like, what are the top ways that young people can find it within their budget to reduce some of the expenses while not sacrificing the quality of life?
Absolutely. So I think step number 1 is actually knowing your expenses, right? So the average person doesn't actually know how much they spend a month. They know their rent. And if they have some other fixed costs, they know that, but they don't track their credit card spending. They don't track what's inflowing and outflowing out of their bank account. And so ultimately, number 1, tracking your expenses, and then break it down, right? Look at fixed costs that are reoccurring that you can cut. And then another thing I do want to emphasize on the show today is by no means does all this early investing mean you have to sacrifice your 20s and slave away.
Well, because I think that's a misconception people have.
Absolutely, right? Tomorrow's not promised. And you never want to completely give up enjoyment of life today for some future dream that's not guaranteed.
I think that keeps some people from saving, though. They're like, okay, if I put this money away, then I'm not going to do anything tonight, and then I'm not going to have a fun time. But I think you found a nice balance to where you have, and maybe you can explain like a spreadsheet that you use, very basic, to help you plan what you're going to spend and what you're going to save.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, the importance of tracking on a monthly basis, even if you're not super technical and analytical like myself and you're tracking semi-annually, I think is a great first step. And then ultimately that can show you, again, where you need to potentially cut expenses, but also how you can increase your savings rate over time. When you actually dig in there and track, you'll find some things you might not even realize you were paying for and probably didn't realize you were spending so much money on. And that also allows you to prioritize what you should be spending money on, right? For me, I love watches and I love travel and a couple other things. I should be able to spend money on that today because that brings me fulfillment and joy. You have some awesome hobbies as well that you've shared that you should be able to spend on. If you have a plan and you know actually how much you're spending versus saving and investing, you can do those things and you'll feel better doing them.
Very well said, dude. And I think it's funny you mentioned how some people don't even know what they spend. I'm actually a victim of that too. I think having a credit card is a nice freedom that I have, but it's also sometimes you can get lost in how much you spent over the month. Sometimes I look at my bill and I'm like, where did this even come from? How did this even happen? To that point, though, what are certain things you talk about expenses you're maybe able to cut down on? Can you give a couple examples of maybe if people took a look at their own spending on a monthly basis, like what are some things that they might not even realize they're paying for?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, again, where I want to talk about, the typical advice is stop buying avocado toast and coffee, right? That's such a small expense. That's something where if, you really feel like you need to cut it out, maybe there are some other things we can find first, right? A cup of coffee a day isn't going to kill you. Ultimately, you want to look at subscriptions as usually a big culprit. So many people sign up for subscriptions that they don't use. And this is going to blow your mind. If you're spending $27 a day on something, that's $10,000 a year. We just talked about $1 being $10, $10,000 over many, many years, right? That's a lot of money left on the table.
So many things today are subscriptions. I think back, let's say 20 years ago, you could just purchase something and then it was done. Nowadays, I feel like almost every product has a subscription model if you'd like to use it. And it's more economical, but you can lose track of what you're subscribed to.
Absolutely, right? If I came to you and said, "Oh, do you want Netflix? It's $360 or whatever it is annualized these days," you'd probably say no. But when it's 30 to, $29.99 a month, much easier to justify that purchase in your mind. So I think taking a look at those things, and again, the first thing you should look at when cutting expenses is, what am I buying that I'm not actually using in any way, shape, or form? Gone.
And
Easy
I bet
money
you,
saved.
honestly, I bet you that if people thought about this, they would say, no, nothing. Everything I pay for, I use. But if you audit yourself, like for example, I subscribe to a streaming television service that I use for 2 or 3 months out of the year when football season is on. And then when football season's over, I don't even use it. I was checking my credit card the other day. I'm like, how am I paying $99 a month for this? And I don't even use it. So I canceled it. And I will resubscribe during football season. That's an example of something that I didn't even think about, that once I actually audit myself, I'm like, oh, that's almost $1,000 a year that I don't need to spend.
Ultimately, when you do make that audit, it does enable you to find those things much easier. So again, with that fear of the unknown, people are afraid to open their bank account and look at their credit card statement and bills. But if you look at those things, you're going to be so glad you did long term.
I am a victim of that too. Every time I open my Chase Bank app, I get like a pit in my stomach. I'm like, I don't even know what I'm going to see, but I know it's not going to be good. So I appreciate this advice. I could probably use it myself. The other side of this is income, right? And I think a lot of people probably feel like they're stuck with whatever they're making and it will just be that way. And maybe they're angry about it because the world is expensive, like very expensive. But there are ways to increase your income. What are some ways you recommend?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing here is that it's actually much more important to increase your income than your expenses, because even organically due to inflation, your expenses will increase even if you're buying the same lifestyle. So increasing your income far more than just commensurate with inflation is essential, because that's going to allow you to continue to buy nicer and nicer things, or at the very least buy the same things that you have been and live the same life you have been. A couple ways that I've seen people, especially that I've worked with, who have increased their income quickly and drastically early on in their careers. The number one thing I would say is pick a profession where even if you are not that good at it, you are paid very well, right? So that's a lot of the STEM fields, a lot of the sciences, accounting, finance. If you have these hard, tactile, tangible skills that the 50% of your industry makes much more than the median wage, do that and then get really good at that job and be in the top 25% of that job. And now you're in the top 10% of overall earners.
That's well said. And also to your point, I think a lot of people that work in any full-time role are not super passionate, let's just say. I think most people are content at their job, but not super passionate. So to your point, if you don't have a natural passion at age 20 to do a certain thing, why not try to do the thing that on average or at the median earns you slightly more than, let's say, other careers? I mean, it just makes logical sense to try something like that.
Absolutely. And the other couple ways I would say, right? So to build off you saying, what if you're not passionate about something in your 20s is totally fine. You thought you liked something, you got into that field, and then you want to make a pivot. That is totally okay. And that's actually a very lucrative opportunity as well. If you pivot while you still have a job, you can say, I'm not leaving for less than 10% higher than what I'm making. Very successful people I know early on in their career quickly jumped up that, six-figure multiple ladder because they said, I make 150, I'm not leaving without 200. I make 200, I'm not leaving without 250. Some of these people have had 3 or 4 jobs in their first decade in the workforce, and their income jumped very drastically.
Well, I know that there used to be a view, at least that my parents had, that like people were very like loyal to their employers for 30 years. Like I had relatives that worked for GE from the time they were 22 to the time they were 65.
Yeah.
Do you see that dynamic changing? And I'm curious if you have an opinion on whether or not you think that's a good thing for trying to earn more when you're young.
Yeah, so I'll go 2 things, right? To your exact point, and it even used to be, that's woven into human history, right? It used to be your dad's a farmer and you're a farmer and your kid's a farmer. Now it's, your dad worked in the coal mines, so you work in the coal mines. Now it's my dad works at Google, so I'm going to work at Meta, right? I really don't see a problem with it. The average person in their career now changes jobs 5 times, and I do believe that's going to increase. I think the biggest reason for that is that we're moving from a things-based economy to a productivity-based economy. So it used to be most jobs involved making or selling things, physical items you could hold and touch. Now it's based on ideas and production and creativity. And so when you have a less tangible thing, right? If I only know how to sell pencils, I might be good at selling erasers too, but really I'm cut out for selling pencils. If I'm really good at selling cybersecurity, right? That comes in so many forms, makes perfect sense that I'd also be good at selling cloud security, right? And I'll give one random and fun tidbit because I mentioned coal miners. So they did a study. They found in West Virginia, coal miners were actually very good computer programmers because they were used to standing in the same spot and moving their hand. When you taught them how to do something else, A, they were happy to be sitting down and not breathing in coal, and B, they were extraordinarily proficient at coding computers. So it is possible. We're seeing this real time.
Wow, man. I never knew that. That is so cool.
Definitely look it up.
I'm curious, right? If you look at, let's say, the best choices you can make when you're young, what are some of the biggest, you would say, opportunities and then some of the biggest financial pitfalls that you see young people making right now?
Yeah, so I think to harken back to the previous part of our conversation, there's never been an easier time to make more money. There are physically more jobs available. There are physically more industries that exist today that didn't used to exist. And most of the old industries still exist. You can still work at a newspaper. You can still be a horse carriage driver over in Central Park,
exactly.
right? So ultimately, I think the biggest pitfalls that folks, run into in their early 20s is not investing enough, right? So I talked about still enjoying your life today. You have to be investing young. If you are not investing as a young person, that means you have a very bleak belief in the future of humanity, because if you want to have money tomorrow and more money than you have right now, you need to invest today. And ultimately, the other, really biggest pitfall I see is someone not taking their career seriously. Even if you don't want to be a doctor or a lawyer or a hedge fund manager, you should still take your career very seriously and strive to be the best you can be in it and learn and grow. Because if you get to your middle ages and you haven't developed a strong skill set and you don't have, an effective resume, that is going to, in your 20s, you can make mistakes and still be successful. In your 40s and 50s, you really can't afford that. So developing that core skill set and building a great network are some of those key things early on.
To your point about being young and being able to change, I think we spoke a bit about pivoting careers and why that's totally fine, but I do think it gets harder as you get a little older.
Absolutely.
So like if you're in your 20s and early 30s, I feel like experimenting is totally fine and maybe it's even better. But if you experiment for 40 years, you're never going to see that hockey stick in your compensation the way you would if you found something after 4 tries and then stuck with it from there on out.
That's another key to having good income and something we should hit on as well. There's so much talk of side hustles and all these other things going on right now. I am huge team anti-side hustle. I am a very big believer on get really, really good at one thing. Like we said, be in the top 50% of something that's already lucrative and get even better at that. That is the single largest way. You look at every single successful person, they're probably not good at a wide range of things, right? They're really, really good at solving one problem or executing one task.
We have a mutual friend that's going to be on the show in a few weeks. It's the first episode. I'll be flying somewhere to film a show, which is unreal. I can't wait. But he would tell you the exact same thing. He learned one specific niche real estate skill when he was 22 years old. We're now 28. And he is, let's say, in the top 1% of that one thing. And he just does it all day, every day. And he makes a killing. I think a lot of people are trying to find how many different ways can I possibly make money? I appreciate your counter argument, which is how can I get so good at what I do that I command whatever salary, whatever income I want?
Absolutely. And I think the other critical mistake, you hear the words passive income a lot, and your friend you're referencing talks about this too. You can make so much higher returns. You can do so much better for yourself with active income that you're earning. Your ability to work and provide income for yourself today is, in fact, your biggest asset. And so having that active income instead of trying to chase all these passive incomes that'll be inherently lower is a much more effective way to increase your net worth today.
And before we move on, I want to touch on this because I see a lot of pessimism generally in the market from young people, specifically around my age and even younger, around everything is so expensive. I don't make enough. Everything costs too much. Your perspective of there has never been a better time to make money is actually one that I don't hear often, but I actually think you are correct because there is no shortage of skills to develop, especially now with the advent of things like artificial intelligence. We can augment our productivity in a million different ways. And if you take that for granted, I think you rob yourself of a lot of professional development.
Absolutely. And there's statistical backing for my argument. Real income has never been higher. So income on an inflation adjusted, correct. It went down for the first time in a long time in 2022 when we had 9% inflation. Right now it's higher than it's ever been. And I'm very bullish on the fact that that number will continue to climb. So statistically, even if it might not feel like it anecdotally based on the cost of living, it has never been, your paycheck has never gone farther.
Well, I'll be honest. Sometimes it feels like my paycheck doesn't get me too far.
Absolutely.
But statistically, it sounds like it does.
Correct.
Well, we're talking a lot about optimizing our finances. I want to talk a little bit about something that I've been doing to try and optimize my health. I don't have a whole lot of time. I'm a busy professional in addition to this podcast. Luckily for me, Magic Mind, which is a producer of a mental performance shot, reached out recently and sent some of their product my way. It looks like this. I know it's a little scary. It's green. Most green things I don't drink. This one I do because it tastes great. It provides me with lower stress, calm energy, and it keeps me focused. I've said it in prior episodes, but I used to be an energy drink fanatic. I still am. I love the occasional white monster.
The best.
It's the best. But this does help me to keep those cravings away and give me the focus that I need to keep going during my day. So I like to drink it on the show to show people that it actually tastes good. So I'm going to do that now.
Chugged it.
You got it. It's an energy shot. I definitely recommend it. I mean, if you guys watching, look at Dan right now. He's chiseled. He's jacked. He's got a great jawline.
It's the lighting.
It's the lighting. But you've done your fair amount of research on supplements and things that are good to hear. So I'm just curious, like some of the things in this, right?
Theanine, I think.
Theanine, ashwagandha, turmeric. It's derived from matcha. These are not made up chemical. Like this is just what you see is what you get, which I appreciate with this.
And that's exactly what a supplement is supposed to be, right? It's not supposed to be your main diet. It's supposed to supplement it. And it's all naturally occurring stuff, right? Theanine is in watermelon. Turmeric is a seasoning. I'm not sure where ashwagandha occurs naturally other than in the root itself, but great stress reliever. All those things are natural things your body wants to produce. And if you give it a little bit of a boost there with that, you can get a little bit more relaxed and sleep easier. So all scientifically backed.
Well, I have an exclusive offer for listeners of this show. You can head over to magicmind.com right now and use the code FOREVERPOD20 to get 40% off your first subscription or 20% off one-time purchases. That's FOREVERPOD20 at magicmind.com. Anyways, man, we've talked a lot about income. We've talked a lot about saving. Let's talk about the investing side, which I think spooks people.
The fun stuff.
Right? The fun stuff. Well, it's fun when the market's doing well. It's not as fun when it's not. Can you just walk me through like a basic approach to investing that somebody might want to have in their early 20s, minding the fact that maybe they don't have a lot of money to invest, but they don't even know where to start?
Absolutely. And again, right, you mentioned the fear that the market is going to go down, the fear that you're going to lose money. When you think about the basis behind investment, right, when you invest in the way that I'm about to outline, you are investing in the growth of humanity, which is at this point inevitable, right? And we have centuries and eons of data to back this up. But 100 years ago, people thought the world was going to end any day now. And 100 years before that, right? And we've had global wars and awful things and cataclysmic events, and the world is turning and child hunger is down and world poverty is down. The world continues to be a better place. I'm a permanent bull on, us as a species. And so if you are too, you have to be investing because again, we talked about real income and inflation. You need to have more money tomorrow than you do today. And if you're listening to this right now and you have an active income, at some point you will no longer want to work. Your W-2 employment or however you're paid is no longer going to compensate you. You need to buy assets today that will turn into tomorrow's paycheck.
Right. And when you talk about buying assets, right, there are different things you can invest in. There's like real estate and there's crypto and there's other private investments. But I think what I'd love to talk about right now is ETFs and stock investing. I think this is a very basic way to approach all this. So can you just, before we dive into that, explain what an ETF is? And then maybe even just explain when you buy a stock, what are you actually buying?
Yeah, absolutely. So the analogy I use for an ETF, it's like a trip to the grocery store. When you go to the grocery store, you could go in and just buy Pop-Tarts, right? We've all been there. That's like buying a stock, right? In this case, Kellogg's stock. When you go to the grocery store, normally you buy a bunch of different things. You put them in your basket and then you check out so you have food for the whole week. And different food is good at different times and different food lasts longer than the others. You can see where I'm going with this. An ETF or exchange traded fund is a basket of stocks based on an underlying target index. So sometimes that's something like the S&P 500. Sometimes that's something like value stocks or a certain sector of the market.
And when you say the S&P 500, what is that?
The S&P 500 is the Standard & Poor's 500. And ultimately, that's really just a measurement of the top largest publicly traded U.S. companies by market capitalization.
And to your point about ETFs, how would the S&P 500 relate to an ETF?
Yeah, so it's great if you don't feel the confidence to know which of the top stocks you should own, you can just go out there and buy something like an S&P 500 ETF, and now you automatically own, at least on paper, the 500 best and biggest stocks, right? I use air quotes because they're not necessarily the best moving forward, but up into our lifetimes, the current top 500 in the S&P are the top publicly traded.
And your analogy about going to the grocery store, if you want to buy an individual stock like Apple, you might get a box of Pop-Tarts. You might take that same money and get 5 different groceries that cost the same amount, but you're getting 5 different things wrapped up into one. And that's effectively what an ETF is, right? You get exposure to a bunch of different companies. What is an example of a few companies you might find in an S&P 500 ETF?
Yeah, so what I love about an index as big as the S&P is it's not just one area of the market. So right, the top 3 names as of today's filming: Apple, Nvidia, Microsoft, obviously all technology companies, but JP Morgan's pretty high up the list, Costco and Walmart. You can find oil companies like
Everybody knows these
ExxonMobil.
names.
Absolutely. It's all names you know and love. And whether you're a hater and you hate big oil, but you know that they print money, or you hate big banks, but you know that they print money, you can own them too without trying to select which big bank you should own.
Roger that. And does that mean that for beginners, you recommend ETF investing just because it provides you kind of a, I don't want to say safer, but a less risky option given the diversification?
Unequivocally. And for sure, I'd love to provide some specific advice here. I will put in a disclaimer. No one should directly follow this advice without consulting a professional. And this is my personal opinion, not clinical diagnosis. But ultimately, the first investment you make should be really in broad-based ETFs. This sets you up for success. Again, at this point, you're just betting on the global economy. One thing I would preach is investing not just in something like an S&P 500 ETF, but also having smaller allocations to small cap, international stocks as well, because there's always other opportunities other than the names you see in the news every day.
Awesome, dude. And if I was a total beginner and I signed on to the Robinhood app and I didn't even know how to find an ETF, what are a few symbols that you might recommend people take a look at?
Yeah, great question. So probably the 2 biggest S&P 500 ones, SPY and VOO. I recommend VOO just because it's slightly cheaper. Another great one would be CWI, which is just international markets. And then my personal favorite small cap ETF is VB, which is just Vanguard small cap ETF.
Awesome. And you can type these in and you can see it, and then you can just hit buy and you can invest.
Absolutely.
One thing that I used to struggle with when I started to invest a little bit, because I invest on my own now, but when I was younger, I didn't know a whole lot about investing. It didn't inspire confidence for me to look at my portfolio and see that my money went up by $3 today. I think it's harder to save when you don't see the compounding taking place. What would you say to somebody that has that type of mindset?
I think it's a totally fair mindset to have. And what I would say is the easiest way for me to get confident and feel really good about it is to add a couple zeros, right? So if you have $1,000 invested today and it went up $1, you know, whatever those zeros are, right? Picture now you have $1 million. That same 10% is, you know, $100,000 that you made. If you can think about it that way, which at some point you will have $1 million if you do the right things, you can understand on a percentage basis that you are in fact making a lot of money. The way I try to quantify it for people is if you got a 10, 20% raise in your paycheck, you would be a really happy camper, right? At some point, your assets should surpass the amount, you know, annually paid in your paycheck. And ultimately, that raise that you'll get each and every year from your investments growing will significantly supersede your income growth.
Can we talk about that for a second? Because I think it'd be really interesting to provide maybe like a real world example so that somebody that's just getting into this might be able to picture it in their mind's eye. When you say that their income level from, let's say, their investments will grow higher than their annual compensation from the work they do, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so really in 2 ways, right? Number one, the value of their investments. So if you have $1 million versus you make 100,000, ultimately, if you get, you know, a 10% raise on your salary, that's another 10,000. If you get a 10% raise on your investments, that's another 100,000.
And that's not to see a 10% gain in a year is not out of the realm of possibilities.
No, and to your point, it is boring on the daily, and the stock market is actually more of a roulette wheel on a daily basis. It's about 50% up or down. But then the more and more you zoom out, the more likely you are to succeed. It's about 60% of weeks are up, 3 out of every 4 years are up. And then when you start getting out to the 10, 20 years, it's, you know, less than a 1% chance of being down.
I think it just speaks to the importance of long-term investing. I think we maybe should just touch on this quickly again. Nobody should take Dan's advice, consult your financial professional. But if you take a look at specific down years, I could see how that might freak somebody out. Like, oh my goodness, imagine you invested in 2008 and then you sold it all in 2009. How important is it not only to invest, but to keep your money invested over time?
Yeah, I mean, you really want to be having that disciplined approach. And if it helps you not looking at your account, the other key thing that will help you in times like this and why we're advertising for ETFs rather than individual stocks is you really can dampen some of that volatility when you do experience a major downturn. So international stocks greatly outperformed US over the next 10-year time span. You know, the NASDAQ took 15 years to return from its peak after 2000, and International markets recovered far quicker. Small caps have outperformed over long periods as well. So having that muted volatility. The other thing I would say, right, and this is where working with a professional is helpful. If you don't need the money anytime soon, why are you concerned? You have not realized the loss until you sold that asset. And so fast forward, you get into retirement. Okay, now we're doing some liability matching. 3 years from now, you're going to spend $120,000. We're going to put that in something guaranteed like a treasury bond. So there's no way, even if the market's down, you're not going to have that money.
Oh, unless the U.S. defaults on its credit, which in that case, the world would be coming to an end.
You got much bigger problems if that your money's no good, right? You're going to need bricks of gold and an assault
We're in
rifle.
World War III at that point.
Yeah. So, thinking about only investing money that you're not going to touch for a while really sets you up for success, because if anything, when the market's down, you can be excited and go buy things on sale. One of my favorite sayings is stocks are the only thing that people don't buy on sale. 2008, right? Nobody's getting excited. If there was a 50% sale off at Lulu tomorrow, we'd all be sprinting there together. There was a 57% on the stock market. The people who did sprint there made a lot of money.
And again, this is maybe a slightly more advanced concept, but I want to touch on it because I think it's really important, and I'm glad you brought it up. When people see the graph go red, I think it's really scary because people are losing money. Mm-hmm. But why is it important to even be purchasing more when you see those big red numbers?
Absolutely. So that's a big part of active management and increasing your rate of return over time. But when you think about buying into stocks, right, your rate of return is based on where you started and where you ended. If you're a 10-year investor, right, and you look at today's stock prices, the only conversation you're having 9 times out of 10 is, I wish I bought more 10 years ago. That informs our vision for why you should be investing for 10 years from now, because you're going to wish you bought at today's prices. Now picture if today's prices were 30% lower, you're going to wish you threw everything you had into the market, because if that purchase point is lower and your investment goes up, right, you've simply made more money.
Right. But to be fair and play devil's advocate, it is scary when you see your portfolio down and you say, I'm going to click the buy button today. So just to put it out there, it is scary. I think over time you get more used to it, especially if you have like really high conviction, let's say in a certain stock. Mm-hmm. And that leads me to my next point again, which is maybe a slightly more advanced thing, but we spoke a little bit off the air about maybe when it makes sense to switch from ETFs to, hey, I'm going to start investing in single stocks. Instead of putting $25 in the QQQ ETF, I'm going to put $25 in Apple stock. Do you think that makes sense for people at a point?
Absolutely. So, and this is again, delving more into my career and the conversations we're having with folks we work with. There are times where, again, this is my personal opinion, markets become inefficient. You look right now at the S&P 500, the top 7 names are 33% of a 500 company indice. That is a problem, right? The market is a little bit disjointed from reality. So if we think about the fact that over a long time, usually those top 7 stocks are a much smaller proportion, what does that mean? We're probably going to see those stocks come down and other stocks go up.
Because everything will revert back to the mean.
Yep, exactly. Law of large numbers. So ultimately, when we think about single stock investing, I think the number one thing to think about is, to your point, having a ton of conviction, doing a ton of due diligence. Just to list off a few things that I identify as green flags in buying a stock: trading at a reasonable valuation. So if you look at the PE ratio, the price to earnings, that stock compared to other stocks in a similar area of the market, and it's lower, that means it's kind of on a discount. The other number one correlation between stocks and their performance long-term is the earnings growth. So you want to look at past earnings growth. Have they been steady growers? And then do they have future prospects of earnings growth? And most of that is publicly available information, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I recognize that this is a somewhat privileged discussion, but also not really, because I think everybody has the right to save, and I think everybody can try their hardest to make it happen. Certain people that are in financial distress, it's just not possible, and I get that. But when you think about the average savings rate, is there like a range that you would recommend for the average American that you don't think is too unrealistic for people to try and save?
Yeah, absolutely. So just kind of general boilerplate rules of thumb, I'd say, between 15 to 30%. I think it really is dependent on a multitude of factors on your individual situation. But if you think about saving roughly 30% of your income, just to make the numbers easier, if you recreate your income every 3 years throughout your whole career, you're going to have a lot of money compounding and investing for you. And I think, again, if it has to be fear mongering, that's what it has to be. If you want to be able to not work anymore, you need to recreate your income through investing. the more aggressively you invest and the more frequently you do so, the quicker you'll be able to, recreate that income and stop working.
Right. Because, as Americans, we are entitled as taxpayers to things like Social Security, which I hope that's around when I retire.
It will be.
And I trust that it will. But I don't know if Social Security alone is enough to, live on and sustain a certain quality of life.
Very unlikely. And it also removes some freedom from your life, right? So you can't pull more money out of Social Security in any one month or, oh, well, I actually didn't spend that much this month. You can keep the $5,000, Mr. and Mrs. Social Security, right? So giving yourself that flexibility to do the things you want to do. And that's what's fun in retirement is being able to control your lifestyle and your tax bracket.
100%. You worked your whole life. Now it's time to pay yourself back.
Absolutely.
Well, clearly you're so unbelievably intelligent when it comes to this stuff. And we could go deep on tax strategies and different ways to, optimize your income and investments. But I got a fun question for you. Do you remember the best piece of financial advice you ever received?
Yeah. So I think ultimately the best piece I've ever received, I'll do a couple. So relating to not investing or investing when there's a pullback, right? More money has been lost waiting for a market correction than has ever been lost in a market correction, right? So I'll give you an example. Last 2 years, the stock market is up over 50%. So many people in that time frame are waiting for a market pullback, right? By the time we do get another pullback, the market will have gone up more. Let's say the market goes up another 10%. People lost 60% waiting for before you even get a 1%, significant pullback. So more money has been lost waiting on the sidelines. I would say the other biggest piece, and this is very specific, is investing outside of retirement accounts. So I think we talk about flexibility, right? You can't touch retirement accounts effectively until you're 60.
And a 401k falls into that, right?
401k, IRA, HSA, there's a couple more, but if you have questions, you can figure out what's a retirement account and what's not. And when I talk about investing outside, really we're just referring to an individual investment account and taxable brokerage. Investing outside of investing outside of retirement in a taxable brokerage, you're going to have goals before 60, most likely. If you're 20 years old listening to this podcast, you're going to want to be able to have money for those goals. And so investing in that taxable brokerage allows you to do that. Also, very common misconception is that retirement accounts are more tax efficient. That's not necessarily true.
Really?
Yeah. So take a pre-tax 401k. You put $100,000 in a 401k pre-tax. You put $100,000 in a taxable brokerage. Fast forward, 401k pre-tax is $200K. Taxable brokerage has already been taxed, but you'll be taxed again on the way out, is also $200K. You're going to pay ordinary income rate, which for most people is higher than 15%, on the full $200,000 you pull out of the 401k. Whereas taxable brokerage, you're only paying 15% on the $100K gain. So I think because it's so simple and automated, people make the mistake of only investing in retirement accounts, wherein in many situations, it makes just as much sense to invest additional funds outside of taxable brokerage. Order of operations should still be focusing a little bit more so on retirement first and then looking for excess. But ultimately, only investing in retirement accounts is often a mistake for people who really want to do anything financially significant before 60.
Well, I'm sitting here as somebody that considers himself somewhat financially literate. I did not know that. And I, in fact, would have thought the opposite. And I do want to make the point to circle back on what you said about more money being lost because people wait on the sidelines than if they had just gone in. I actually think, not to make this a metaphor about life, but I think that's generally true in life.
Yeah, dive in.
Right? And this is not a motivational part or self-help, but just generally speaking, there will never be a perfect time to do anything. There will never be a perfect time to invest. And there will never be a perfect time to start a new habit. Or take me as an example. I almost didn't even want to start this show. I felt like I kind of had to, but you get to a point where you say, okay, either I do this today or I'm never going to do it. And I think that's true again with investing. Either you start today or you spend a week, a month, a year, a whole life saying, I'll just do it tomorrow. I'll just do it when it makes sense. There will never be a perfect time to open that account. But unless you open it, you won't actually do it.
To build on your metaphor, right? The stock market is like a human life. You build, you grow, you create a family, you accomplish all these amazing things, whoever you are out there listening to this. That looks like the long-term chart of the stock market, right?
Oh, it does.
So I think if you just take that, to your point, leap of faith and go after something and go all in on something, that's going to lead to a lot of success. Another kind of quote that I really like, indecision is the enemy of progress, right? So more, not necessarily money, but more opportunities and gains are missed by being frozen up and not doing anything. Sometimes better to do something, make a mistake, and then course correct, because at least you did something and you can learn from that mistake.
I'm going to hit you guys with one more quote to build off of Dan's quote, which is the precursor to the master is the fool. And that's true here as well, right? If you don't want to invest because you feel like you're going to be so dumb and you're not going to know what it is, I think it's better off, and I understand we're dealing with money, so it's more serious, but it's better off to dabble in it, learn a little bit, not lose your whole life savings, but learn along the way. But I think a lot of people are scared of the acronyms and they don't want to do it because they feel like they'll feel stupid. And that is dangerous. The biggest risk is taking no risk.
Failing to plan is planning to fail.
Well said,
quote
man.
session going on.
I try not to do that, man. I try not to speak in this show in like platitudes and isms, but in this specific case, I think this is relevant.
Agreed.
So if you had to recommend somebody a book on, let's say, finance or investing or saving that would be easily digestible for somebody in their 20s, what would you recommend?
Yeah, so I think a lot of what informs my investment thesis comes from Stocks from the Long Run by Professor Jeremy Siegel. I'm like his number one fan. No one probably recognizes the name I just said, but I've met him in person. It was a total nerd out moment. It was
Let's
great.
go, man.
He's a professor at Wharton and just really makes the case for investing in equities over a long period of time. So I think just basic investment strategy. He talks about dividends, a few other really cool just tidbits and facts, a lot of which I recited today. And then The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel, I believe. Fantastic book that talks a lot about waiting on the sidelines and being afraid, and how the human mind is so much more averse to losing money than we are excited about making money. And that's where a lot of people get tripped up. But talks same old thing, right? Zooming out, looking over a long period of time, not investing is quite simply betting against humanity.
I love that. I've read the second one. It's an extremely good book, and it's not
quick.
even a technical read.
No.
Very high level. Gives you what I would call is a lot of insights about your own psyche and why you do or do not do certain things with money. That certainly helped me. I read it when I was 22. All right, so last question, and I'm excited to have this quick discussion with you because we both live in Manhattan, and based on my YouTube analytics, I have several viewers that live in the Manhattan area, but I also have viewers that live in other high-cost cities like San Francisco and Chicago, etc. I wonder if you would recommend to people to stay away from certain high cost of living areas, or if you think it's worth it for young people to live in places like this for whatever reasons you may give.
And this is a conversation I have with clients all the time, and I love leading with this question. It unlocks someone's true personality and helps you get to know someone really personally. Is what's important to you, right? What are your values? If your values are action-packed, mile a minute, doing anything I want on a weekend, I can wake up on a Saturday and the world is my oyster, there is no better place to do that in New York City. And the next 5 names on the list are those other big cities you mentioned.
Right.
If something really important to you is peace and quiet, not worth it at all to New York, right? If something really important to you is living in a really affordable, value-packed area, probably New York's not your best bet. So you have to understand what your values are, and that should really inform these big macro life decisions that you make, including where to live. You know, for me personally, having something to do, exploring the city with my wife, doing all these fun things before we settle down and have a family makes New York absolutely worth it for me. 20 years from now, when I'm, dropping kids off, whatever, soccer practice, doing whatever I'm going to do, probably not as important to me to be able to do 20 things on my Saturday. I'm already going to have a booked calendar.
Yeah. So to your point, it's like, if it makes sense for what you really like and enjoy, then you're not saying, oh my gosh, avoid Manhattan, it's crazy here. Mm-hmm. It's like, you can make it work. And salaries, you'll make more here, but you'll pay more.
Absolutely. It in my opinion, and I don't have a ton of numbers behind it, it all kind of evens out, right? You pay twice the rent in New York, but you make twice the money, roughly. So I think at the end of the day, it really is just prioritizing, things that are important to you and finding an area to live. It's never been easier to move across the country and try different cities. And that's what your 20s is all about, is exploring, right? So figuring out those things that are important to you might come through finding out what you realize isn't important to you and what you don't like.
Absolutely, man. Well, I just want to, wrap up quick by saying a few things. One, that's the first time I've ever heard you say my wife. So I've known you for a long time. Congratulations. You're a married man.
You.
We're growing up.
Thrilled.
It's crazy, man.
You're going to be saying the same thing.
I know. I said it in the last episode. I recently got engaged. I'm a fiance. It feels really good, but it also feels weird. Like, what the heck? I'm not 14 anymore.
Yeah.
But I also appreciate your whole approach to this, right? I think some people view financial advisors and people that are really financially savvy as people that will tell you, don't spend, live below your means. You need to restrict yourself in order to have more later. I don't necessarily think that's your approach. I think there's more nuance in it, and it makes it seem not as scary to save money and invest because you can do it clearly, based on what we just discussed, while also enjoying your life.
Absolutely. Why not, instead of trying to move slices around on the pie, it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. Grow the pie. That means you can save more. That means you can spend more. And the last thing we want to do is that's how you create an awful relationship with money, is if someone only views it as a means to an end. Your relationship with money really should be, this is a tool I have in my toolbox to do fun things, because that's really what it is, right? I think we've talked about it. If not, you've talked about it on other episodes, right? You're working and you're trading time and effort for things, right? That's really all money is just the middleman in that type of transaction. And so make sure that you're doing the work and providing for yourself so that you can do those fun things. That really helps people have a better relationship with money.
Well, again, as everything you've said is exceptionally well put, and clearly it's not a complete trade-off. It's not like I save more, my life gets worse. I save less, my life gets better. These two things are not mutually exclusive.
Absolutely.
Well, man, it's been an absolute pleasure. It always is, and it really is an honor to have you on the show. As I said in the beginning, I will say it again, I do not know anybody that even sniffs the level of financial literacy that you have. So thank you as always.
Appreciate that. Happy to share and excited, for the feedback on this one.